Hello, my name is Tanya, and I'm from the Indigenous Youth News. And today I'll be talking about Treaty Number 6 from location in Edmonton. I will be discussing the creation of Treaty Number 6 as well as the legacy it has on today. So I hope that you enjoy listening to this and that you gain some knowledge on the Treaty Number 6. Treaty Number 6 was signed on August 23rd of 1876 at Fort Carlton and at Fort Pitt on September 9th of 1876 in Saskatoon. Both of these locations were chosen because at this very point in time, during it was a difficult time for the Plain Cree who were suffering from a rapid decline of the buffalo in this area. The signing of Treaty Number 6 can be seen as a signature of hope, as the First Nation had hope that all the promises that the government had made to them will be fulfilled, and this will help them revive their community as well as their resources. The First Nations involved in the treaty are the Cree, Saulteaux, Nakota, and Dene. When the First Nations and the government came to negotiation for Treaty Number 6, the promise made by the Canadian government and on behalf of the Queen of the Great Britain was the following. The government had promised that a medicine chest would be kept on each reserve. This is what makes Treaty Number 6 unique because it is the only signed treaty with an implied provision for healthcare. The government also promised that they would receive a land in the amount of 1 square mile per family of 5. They would receive a school once the people settled on the reserve. They also received the right to pursue hunting, trapping, fishing. During the first 3 years after the treaty was taken, First Nation who had settled on the reserves and were farming were to receive $1,000 in agricultural provision. They would receive an annual cash payment at the rate of $25 per chief, $15 for a headman, and $5 for all other band members, and one-time present of $112 for each member who agreed for the treaty. Unfortunately, all of the promises in which the government had made did not come to pass as some of them were left unfulfilled. The First Nation of Treaty 6 became distressed by the scarcity of their resources, such as the buffalo, so they looked to the government to assist them in establishing the reserve and provide farming equipment. But the government had other priorities, like building a railway, and did very little to help the Plains First Nations. When the government did decide to pay attention to them, they would interpret the treaties only just and neglect to address them at all. The First Nation also initially thought that they would be allowed to select a reserve of their choice, but that also were left unfulfilled. At the end of the day, both sides just had very different worldviews on the meaning of the treaties, and they just ended up clashing and causing a diminish of their relationship. Even though not everything in the treaty were fulfilled, the treaty did give First Nation did provide First Nation with sovereignty by giving them a recognition as a sovereign nation within Canada, as they gave up their land, the way of life, their culture, in order to continue for Canada to continue to grow. The treaty provided First Nation with sovereignty because these documents were recognized and signed by both sides, which could be seen as the beginning of a relationship between First Nation people and the government. This showed that the Canadian government at this very time recognized First Nation people as individuals who put great value in their resources and should be dealt with respect and understanding. Even though the treaty recognized First Nations as a sovereign nation, both sides had very different worldviews, as I've said, on the meaning of the treaties and the significance of the treaties. First Nations saw the treaty from a very spiritual perspective, while the government and Europeans saw the treaties as a very legalized document. The spirit and intent of the treaties from a First Nation perspective is that the sharing of the from the ceremony which took place before the signing of the treaty was an act binding and a full commitment for the treaties. An atmosphere of alliance and friendship was created and expressed through the pipe ceremonies. First Nation believed that the Creator witnessed the signing of the treaty and guided the signing. Their understanding was that First Nations and Europeans had adopted each other as brothers and sisters and will share the land. The specific intent of the spirit of the Treaty Number 6 is to give First Nation an opportunity for self-determination, which includes both the right to choose their own governmental and political structures and to direct the social, cultural, spiritual, and economic advancement of their people. While in the European and governmental perspective, they saw the treaty as a very legalized system, and that immediately it was signed, that First Nation had given up their sovereignty and their land, and that it was okay for them to come and take over the resources and the land and push First Nations people away, which once again caused their relationship to diminish as it was a clash of worldviews, and both sides just never truly really understood each other, even though they signed the document. The treaties are, even though there was a misunderstanding in terms of the worldviews in which the treaties and their significance, the treaties are still significant today because they recognize, once again, First Nations. People gave up a considerable amount of land and resources so that Canada can continue to grow as a nation, and that us as Canadians can become successful with the resources in each and every land in which and territory in which we go to. First Nation also gave up their way of life and culture, therefore recognizing these treaties acknowledges their sacrifice in which they made in the past and their plight to be recognized as a sovereign people in their nation. So that's why it's really important to build awareness around the treaty and why they are really important to this very day. The guiding question which I chose for this entire vlog, which really spoke to me, was how might the signing of treaties provide us with a better understanding of colonization in Canada? I chose this question because it really depicts the bigger picture on what occurred during the signature of treaties and how colonization had a great influence in the terms of the treaties. At this very period of time during colonization, Europeans and the government had one goal, and that was to assimilate First Nation and also take over the land, as they saw this land as very resourceful as people began immigrating to Canada. So many of the terms in treaties were given to First Nation as a way to push them away so they could move into the land. And it really gives us a better and an in-depth understanding of colonization in Canada and the impact in which it had on First Nation people. When many, as I said, when many treaties were signed, they were really signed with the intentions that the government wanted to give First Nation a document, but they also wanted to take over. So if we're able to see the signing of the treaties and compare it and kind of interconnect it to colonization, they're very connected. Many of these treaties were signed during colonization, and many of these treaties were signed with terms that had a great influence from colonization. So I hope that you got a bit of an insight on Treaty Number 6, and that you continue gaining much more knowledge on Treaty Number 6. So thank you for watching, and have a great day.